right, we are live. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Holy Humanist. I hope everyone's doing okay. And I know I put this out kind of last minute in the community post, but I hope people are here for this. Or if not, you must watch this afterwards because I think today is going to be a very, very interesting discussion. I have a wonderful guest with me. Her name is Jasmin Falk Dickerson, and she is a author, speaker, podcaster, and educator. And without giving away too much, she's written a book, a memoir that we'll discuss further in the stream today. But essentially, she reached out to me, I guess, on the back of the podcast that I did with Andrew Gold, where I go into my life growing up in Saudi Arabia. And she's also done a podcast for Cults to Consciousness, an amazing channel as well. I will pop that in the description. Please go and subscribe to them if you haven't already. They're doing amazing work, kind of covering various types of cults and the deconversion process of people leaving those cults. And it covers all angles, like cults that I'd never even heard of. So yeah, definitely go and follow them. But yeah, I'm very, very glad that Jasmin reached out to me because it turned out when I heard her story and I had the chance to kind of quickly skim through her book, there were so many parallels and so many stark similarities with, I guess, the entire like understanding and awareness of what kind of society you're in, what that means for your life as a young girl, what that means for your future, and ultimately making the choice to do whatever you can to break away and essentially free yourself from that. So like I said, without giving away too much and without further ado, I'd like to welcome on Jasmin. Hi, Jasmin. Welcome to Holy Humanist.
Thank you, Nuriyah. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here today.
Oh, no, thank you. The pleasure is all mine. As I was saying to my viewers, obviously, who might be getting to know you for the first time, I'm so excited, Jasmin. So I know we've got a lot of kind of ground to cover, and we're gonna hopefully touch on some realities growing up in Saudi Arabia that people might not be that familiar with, just having our own lived experience and yourself actually being from that culture itself. So yeah, I guess just to introduce a little bit about, I think we'll start from the back if that's okay, but
Sure.
I'd like to share your book with people and I'd like to just kind of get your thoughts on what prompted you to write a memoir and yeah, what was kind of the inspiration behind that, obviously your story, but what made you think, right, this needs to be turned into something bigger and for people to know about?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that. So I've said multiple times, and people have heard me say this. I never really set out to write a book. I never set out to write my story or tell my story. It's hard when you are living in a situation and you feel like you really just want to put it all behind you and move forward. However, I mean, a big part of that is just making sure that we are documenting history accurately. It's unfortunate that we live in a time where it's really hard to find accurate information, and we no longer really listen to people who have had said lived experience. History is always written by, those who have power, and so it's important that we listen to people's stories from their own lived experience. And these are normal people. These are people who, like myself, are not necessarily famous or seeking fame or anything along those lines, just really wanting to connect. And part of the reason why I wrote the story is because I think a lot of people, when they hear just the headlines of my story or what I'm here to do or what I'm here to talk about, they immediately assume that I'm here to, bash or criticize, and far from that. That is not my intention here at all. Quite the opposite. When I speak to my story and my experience, in large part, it is to deconstruct how at times people who have a lot of power, religious power, whatever kind of power, take that on to twist and turn realities for norms and people and circumstances and situations where people are living happily, but maybe not openly or free. And so the book is my hope in the book is that, first of all, it's a coming of age story. So it's very relatable to anyone. You don't have to have lived the life that I have lived to relate to it. It's a coming of age of any young person that just wants to find their own. And then to shed light on a reality of an area and a part of the world that not much has been said and documented about. So yeah, I hope that kind of starts to answer your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was fantastic. Thank you. And again, just like as you said, it's a coming of age story. There's a massive feminist undertone to it, obviously, to your entire journey as well. So it's kind of all the things that excite me. And, I think people underestimate how much you are taking on. And when we say like the powers that be that you're taking on, it is kind of like, as a lone woman, to go against almost every aspect of society and authority that's working against you. It is no easy feat. So I'm glad people like yourself are, capturing these stories and kind of putting them out there in the public domain. And again, I just think, pushing the boundaries on what is acceptable for us to say, and in terms of speaking our truth, and however that kind of, leads other people to think about, situations, or just the plight of women in a different part of the world that you might not have a window into that personally. So I really
Yeah.
thank you and commend you for writing that.
Absolutely. I want to add real quick. I also want to say this, and I know this statement is going to be very controversial, but here I go. Um, Women of the Middle East specifically are probably the most silenced women in the world. And I know people will disagree with the statement, and that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their experience and their opinion. But culturally, religiously, the combination of a lot of things that has happened during the recent, 1,000 years or so has really made it so that women in that area cannot really speak. And so to me, that's really problematic, because anytime there is a concern, a human rights concern, violation, whatever that may be of that part of the world, we are still too anxious, nervous, scared, whatever the term is, to talk about it. And that's not to say that women don't suffer all over the world. Of course they do. Women, period. In this case, however, my lived experience is as a woman from that region. And so that's what I speak to. It's not to minimize anyone else's experience. It's not to inflate anyone else's experience. It's really just to talk to and speak to my experience, where I have witnessed this being such a common thing with so many, the majority, of silenced women. Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I was
There
saying,
we go.
yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly, that these stories need to come out and they need to be told. And like you said, obviously the men in power, the establishment, the powers that be, that are kind of, and you can put this all across the Middle East. It's not just Saudi Arabia, as we're going to
No.
discuss more today, but the entire GCC region, and even beyond. They do not want these women's voices to come out or be heard. They will do anything to kind of silence you. If you don't manage to escape, they will do everything to lure you back and silence you. And we've heard many stories that aren't as successful as mine or Jasmine's, where we've been able to leave without consequences per se. But there's times when they very much got stopped in their tracks and brought back. And you can cue in the UAE sheikh's daughters in this as well. But yeah, so the link to Jasmine's book is in the description. And there's also a discount code for the entire month of July. So right after this stream is done, I will add that discount code as well for you. But you can, sorry, Jasmine, it's not available on Amazon at the moment. Is that correct?
No, it's sold out, and I don't know how it's back orders.
Amazing.
I don't know how soon they'll get that, but it is from the publisher directly, Book Baby. I think it's also on other platforms if you shop elsewhere, but yeah, so it's on Book Baby bookstore, I
Okay,
think.
yeah.
But
And we've
I think
linked
you
that
have
in
the
the
link on there. Yeah.
descriptions.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So again, that's a perfect prelude, I guess, to, can you, I guess, talk us through your upbringing as a young woman in Saudi Arabia, and I guess just the context in general, because what I thought was really interesting about your story was how much your, I guess, dual ethnicity played into things.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna, kind of push on this a little bit later as well, because I think that's, even just from you growing up and your mind that was kind of being shaped in a certain way, I feel like
Mhm.
parts of one culture more than another maybe kind of helped you figure out things and make certain decisions and keep you kind of grounded. But we'll get to that. But yeah, just
Yeah.
please paint us a picture of who you are and what life's like for you growing up.
Sure. Yeah. So my parents are part of the first generation of bi ethnic or international marriages, really, in Saudi Arabia. My father was Saudi. He was born and raised and grew up in Saudi Arabia. And by the around the time that he was born was really right around the time that the recent iteration of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was founded, so late 1930s. And sometime in the 50s and 60s, the country, especially with the discovery of oil and sort of prosperity on the way, decided to send a group of Saudi fully with scholarships, sending them around the world to educate them, to bring them back and the education they've learned to Saudi Arabia to build this newly found country. So a very kind of cool and promising approach to investing in the youth of the country, and in, obviously this was just for men at the time, but investing in the youth of the country and building the country. And so based on their choices of fields of study, they were sent to different parts of the world. My dad was interested in architecture and interior design, and was sent to Italy, of course, the capital of art in the world, and specifically to Florence, where my mom is from. My mom was raised in Florence. She was born and raised Italian, generation after generation. She's full-blooded Italian. And they met in Florence, fell in love. This is a romance of the early 1960s. And, and of course, I go into details in the book, but one of the things was my father was asked not to, by his mother, not to come back with, excuse me, not to come back with a Western wife. And unfortunately he did. But at the time, my grandmother, his mother, had passed away. And so, so he already went to Italy knowing that there was this already perceived judgment about him potentially marrying a Western woman and bringing her back. There was this fear. And I can understand it. This had never happened before. This is totally foreign to, especially where my father comes from, which is the northern part of Saudi Arabia, extremely traditional. He's from Hayel, which is very traditional, very, very conservative, and just had not had a lot of opportunity to mix with the West. And so my parents did get married in Italy, but then moved to Saudi Arabia and started their family there. And a lot of people, oftentimes when I speak, and I've seen the comments, assume that I was born in Italy and then moved to Saudi. No, I was born in Saudi Arabia. I was raised in Saudi Arabia. I spent summers in Italy because of my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and cousins and my Italian family. So we did spend time there. But I grew up in Saudi Arabia. And I also add to that, people are always confused when they hear my accent. My English is, I speak like a native. It's because I grew up multilingual. I speak 3 languages fluently. And that's because my mom cared to raise us extremely fluent in 3 languages that she believed would serve us. And so I went to private school. My teachers were either American or British or Irish, or, so I was exposed to American English essentially from day one. So let me put that out there right away, because I know the criticism is very, very common. And so I hope that begins to address just a little bit of my background. But yes, I did grow up in Saudi Arabia, and I spent most of my, all of my schooling there until college, obviously, when I moved to the US. But yeah, does that begin to answer the question?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And that's interesting about the accent thing that people pick up on, because even when I was in school in Saudi Arabia, and I mean, actual Saudis, like you said, and I'm talking about even like children of the Saudi royal family, they spoke just like you. I feel like it's just, the standard globalized accent, if you will. There was a lot of people, I think you're going to have a very kind of enunciated Saudi-esque accent, but that's
right. And
really
you come from sorry to interrupt. You come from a younger generation, and now it's really very common to see and hear young Arab, people from all regions, but especially Saudis. I mean, they are very educated, and they do speak comfortably multiple languages. I find it very interesting when the critique comes from individuals who only speak one language. So
yeah.
I'll just put that out there.
Yeah, touche. But no, so again, and I think you're right, because I moved to Saudi, like, let's say a little bit into the future. So when I heard your story play out, I was, and again, to just give some context to our experiences, I was in Jeddah growing up, which was essentially more liberal, let's say, for lack of a better word. But you were in Riyadh, which again, I heard horror stories from Riyadh, and I bring it up a lot of the times when I tell my entire life story, that things I heard about that city was like chop chop square. And when we had the Mudawa, the religious police, they were a nuisance in Jeddah. I'm not going to lie, they were. And they would make the lives of non-Muslim women kind of a nightmare as well, when they were just going out grocery shopping and things like that. But where you were growing up in Riyadh, how was, and I, correct me if I'm wrong, you were actually in a villa. So I lived in a compound, which was still like a different world within Saudi Arabia. But you've got the harshness of Saudi or Riyadh's realities, and you're kind of growing up. What was that like?
Yeah, very interesting. And the interesting thing is, even though that's the reality that I knew and that's the reality I grew up in, it still felt like there was something off and odd about it. And I'm not saying anything that the majority of the people who were also living there didn't feel or say as well, obviously privately. Um, Again, my story is my story, and I'm talking about the era that I grew up in, primarily the 80s and the 90s, when a lot of this had happened. Even today, the country recognizes that that was a really problematic era, socially, and that it caused a lot of problems, and they are now working on, undoing a lot of that and kind of regrouping and moving forward in a different way. And I will not speak to today. I understand there are changes that are happening, and I'm happy about that, but I am not there now, and so I won't speak to that. I will speak to the time that in which I grew up and where I, witnessed a lot of those issues. And again, and people will say, well, if it's in the past, why do you need to bring it up? I bring it up because, first of all, it does not mean that that has gone completely. It's still a problem in many parts of the world, and specifically the region that we're talking about. So that is number one. Number two, you cannot fix the past if you don't face it and kind of, address it and deconstruct it. So that's another reason we can't look back and say, well, I mean, slavery was in the past, or the Holocaust was in the past, or, any of these genocides were in the past. So that's number one. I'll say that right away. And so from my experience growing up there, it was deeply, deeply oppressive. The Matawa were there day in and day out. And again, I know the comments will say they're no longer there. I understand that, and I'm happy about that. And I'm talking about a time when that was there, and the damage that it caused to a lot of young people. And yes, of course, I'm here to speak on behalf of women that have my shared experience, but this has also impacted young men a lot, because it's not a normal life for men or women to grow up in that way. And so for us, it was literally every single behavior, choice, conduct, day in and day out, was 100% controlled by what the Matawa would say or do outside of our home. So I lived in the confines of my parents' home, which was a villa, and it had, 12-foot walls around it. And so when we were in the confines of our home, we were fine, we were safe. I wore normal clothes and everything was fine. But the minute you left those confines, you had to be covered from head to toe, because otherwise you would be chased, beaten, arrested by these matawa. And that was a fact, no matter where you were, the grocery store, the mall, the traditional souks, wherever you were. I've never gone on just a simple walk in Riyadh, in downtown Riyadh. The Westerners or the expats that came and lived in my country knew it far better than I did, because I didn't get to see it anywhere because I was perpetually harassed.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, when I was there in the 2000s, I could only imagine, as you were saying, like what it was like when it started to get, they would get a little bit more pushback in terms of how much authority they had, because yeah, the Mudawa, literally after the royal family, held so much sway in the country and what goes on. Like it's wild to think as an outsider how much sway they actually hold. But I'm glad that you brought up the fact that this is also a very unnatural way to live for men as well.
Mhm.
Pretty much men of all ages, but particularly like young boys and men and going through their kind of, adolescent years.
Yeah.
In terms of pastimes, I could also see them struggling. And, after school, it's like, well, what do they actually do besides sports? And they would all just congregate at like the video games or billiard center. That was like one of two real things that they could actually do. And again,
And that
there
wasn't there
was
when I was growing up. So I'll
yeah,
just say that.
yeah, it baffles me. I'm like, what? Yeah, it's again, it's just so, like you said, the concept of a walk seems unfamiliar to, especially as you were living. You live in a villa. You're a young Saudi Muslim woman. You're not going to be just strolling the streets. It does. It's as crazy as that. You literally are taken with a male driver, door to door, dropped off, covered up while you're out. And I'm not sure about Jasmine, how was it for you when you would go, like, I guess, out to the malls or whatever? Would you get followed by men if, they even caught on to seeing this much ankle or that kind of thing? You'd have to take shelter in a shop because, yeah, I have like memories of being like 10, 11 years old and having to do that. I'm sure it was was the same in Riyadh or
Oh
worse?
yeah. Oh, probably worse because like you said,
Yeah.
Jeddah was definitely already a little more progressive and a little more open. So you were at risk of being either harassed from one side by the Mutawa, the religious police, or the other side, young desperate men who just wanted attention. And so you would be perpetually harassed with these young men that are throwing little pieces of paper with their phone numbers on them, or their pager numbers, because at the time it was pagers. So their pager number, and they just throw these little pieces of paper at you. And this was also if you were in the car and they happened to be driving, young men happened to be driving and notice that there's young women in a car, and they'd start literally, barricading the vehicle you're in with tons of vehicles, and then start throwing these pieces of paper, to the, hoping that, and some girls would open their windows and receive those numbers because again, I mean, these young girls also wanted that same kind of attention, or they would, put big pieces of paper on their windows showing their phone number, and this actually was such a dramatic behavior that I can tell you, one of my classmates when I was in eighth grade was killed in a car accident because of this, because of being chased by these young men, her driver trying to escape them, trying to go down alleys. It was a horrible event, and not the only one, but this was it. There was this very intense. Just in a moment, this intensity of like just wanting to have, this attention, and same thing when you're outside and you're walking. If you're not with an elderly woman, visibly elderly woman, or you're with a mahram, one of the men in your family that is your guardian, you are harassed. If it's a group of girls, if it's one single girl, that's why I never went out. And I didn't go out, not just because I didn't want to and it bothered me, but my parents were very protective and made sure that I wasn't exposed to that situation, all the time. And even when I was in the car with our driver, the nanny was with us. So I was also there with, not I don't even know what the nanny could have done, but I think it just set this precedent to other people that like this is someone that has more protection. The family is a little more, aware, or I don't even know what the logic behind it was, but it definitely created just a slight shield when you were in a vehicle with more than just the driver, as opposed to young girls that, that's all they had, maybe just the driver or a limousine, or, and when I say limousine, I mean a taxi, because over there they call them limousines. I think you know that, but so yeah,
I
words
know
are
the
coming
first time
back.
I was saying that to somebody, like, oh, we had to get a limousine to go out, and they were like, wow. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, no, 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 it's not what you think. But
Yeah.
no, again, I'm really, really glad you brought up that point, Jasmine, because and I'm so sorry about your friend, because this is a reality. Like,
Mm.
it happens again across the GCC. Like, I've traveled throughout the length of it, and it's very, very dangerous. I mean, at times they literally come so close to your car, and as Jasmine was
Yeah.
saying, they barricade it from all ends, just to kind of get close enough to throw in a little piece of paper through the window, or hoping that
Mhm.
you'll open your window a little bit. And it's truly traumatic. And especially if, as a young Muslim woman, there were times in the UAE when I was actually in the car with my dad, and they would come across the passenger side and still try.
Wow.
My dad's here, that's dropped it off.
I think you're free. Okay, there you go. I think you froze for a
Am I
second.
back?
Yes, you are. You are.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Okay. Yeah, sorry if that happens, I will be back. So
No
just, yeah,
worries.
sorry
We
to be.
lost you when you were talking about they would come to the passenger side with you in the car with your dad.
Yeah, and so I mean, there's just added in a shame, as like, as a Muslim woman, there's more reason, a young Muslim woman, more reasons for you to not leave the house, because you can't even go for a simple trip to the mall with your father now without this happening. And then, like I said, internalized misogyny, guilt, shame. I internalized all of that, and it's not your problem. It's not your fault at all. But in that kind of setting, you do think it is, and it reinforces, all that need to cover up. And if he wasn't there, what would they have done? So it reinforces the need for a mahram, as Jasmine alluded to, which is like, your male guardian. So I also wanted to touch upon that, Jasmine, because I think that's one of the worst ways that women are kept oppressed in Saudi Arabia. And by extension, I would think this is kind of Islam's overarching way to keep women oppressed, because in Islam, and I think Saudi Arabia's guardianship or wali system is the perfect illustration of this. Essentially, as a woman, you are perpetually a child in Islam. You will
Mhm.
never have agency. That, I mean, and I think you even kind of broke it down really well in your podcast with Cults to Consciousness. But I just want to hone in this a bit more, that as a woman in Islam, if let's say your father dies, you don't have a son, and you're a widow as well, or you were never married, then literally your grandfather's third removed uncle, if that's the closest male
Yeah.
relative to you, I know this is hyperbole, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
they would still have authority over you before you yourself have agency. And I'm talking about a woman that we consider a grown woman of sound mind here in the West. So,
Yeah.
yeah, Jasmin, can you just tell me, what was life like having the reality of that? Were you able to travel freely? Were you able to, did you have to get permission for everything? What was it like?
Yeah, thank you for asking that because it's really important. And before I give my answer, let me be very clear. I know things are changing there, and I know that a lot of this has changed. So please don't, you know, deconstruct what we are talking about here. We are talking about a reality that has occurred. So even though things have changed in certain parts of the region, they have not changed everywhere, and they are, these are still realities that happen. And I will not speak to what's happening today because I have no idea the depth and the details of it. I have a general idea, but I don't know exactly what is going on right now in terms of the level of freedoms from mahram and all that. So I'm not speaking about today. I'm speaking about my experience in the time that I was there, which was 70s, 80s, 90s, and I know for Nuriyah that was even a little later. And my belief is that the changes did not start occurring until 2018. That's literally only 5-6 years ago, and so those changes are recent, and change does not happen overnight. So, stating all that, now I move to answer your question. Um, I had the perfect anecdote. One of my closest friends, her father passed away. She had 3 sisters, and her father was an only child. Her mother was an only child. And so her mother, the widow, without any brothers, also with a father that's passed away. So no grandfathers, no uncles on either side, no male cousins on either sides, because these are, single children, the parents. And so there were no siblings with children. Long story short, there was no direct male relative that these 5 women, the mom and the 4 daughters, had essentially. And so the court appointed a male guardian to them. It was a family friend that they, asked for. If there's no family friend, then the court just appoints someone randomly. But this was I witnessed this, so I'm not making this up. This is what happened at the time. This was the norm, and none of it was addressed like it was a problem or an issue or, oh my gosh, can you believe this? It was just the norm. And so what I'm trying to do here with this conversation is just bringing forth the status quo, which was the norm at the time. And now looking back, for a lot of people, they look back and they're like, oh, that's crazy, or that's insane, or how could that be? But this was the norm there. Some of us found it very, very problematic, but couldn't say anything about it. But that is the reality. And the mahram literally controls every aspect of your life, every single one. Where you go, who you're with. And again, families, yes, they practice things differently. I know there were families that were a lot more open and modern and allowed a lot more freedom to their women. Fantastic, good for them. I admired them and envied them from a distance as well. That being said, my family was fairly reasonable and very, progressive, but also adhered to the expectations of society because of all the ramifications potentially that could happen, and also partly because some of that belief system was, you know, um, I want to say also adopted. And so it's a lot more complex. People tend to have responses immediately to every little thing you say, but these are such layered experiences, and the nuances of every aspect of it, first of all, was changing from day to day because there were, things adopted based on who's the new sheikh now that's speaking to it, who is the new mufti that's going to change it, who has now radicalized this ideology that maybe up until 10 years ago it was doable or manageable, and now they've decided we're taking a different spin or approach to it. And so within the application of the religion, and I'm not here to criticize any religion, I really don't care. I'm here to criticize the application and interpretation and imposition in the name of these religions, whatever the religion does. And if it does good for certain people and it serves people spiritually, good for them. And I say, go for it, devout yourself and enjoy your life and devotion. And I'm happy for you. And I say that genuinely. I'm not criticizing at all. It didn't work for me, doesn't work for me. And that's fantastic too. But the application and the use and the manipulation of these so-called, religions is what I have a deep, deep problem with, and what ultimately I think is damaging a large percentage of society, and especially women.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm really, really glad that you kind of dedicate to, I've just had chance to skim your book, and I'm going on a long journey, so I'm gonna hopefully get through it all and get back to you. But I'm glad that you really kind of focused on that element, because again, people don't realize how fundamental it is to daily life in Saudi Arabia, and how a simple thing like having an idea to want to attend a class or go on a course or further your education, you would need actually like literal written permission from a man in your life to be able to do those things. And as Jasmine was saying, massive disclaimer, because Saudi Arabia is kind of switching things up a little bit, and I don't even know the full extent to how the wali system applies now, because I think you are able to leave Saudi Arabia a bit more freely as a woman now. So they've eased up on that, but on the ground level, practically speaking, I'm sure there's still kind of very tight controls around that. So again, we're not going to actually know the full extent of the, not, I don't know if I should call it reform yet, but
Yeah.
the easing of what we are currently discussing. But even fast forward to the to about 2020 in the UAE, we were still having to get written permission to start a new job, to apply for a job. Like, you have to submit letters to the government saying that, either my father or my husband allows me to work. And, even what they put on your visa to kind of give you permission to stay in the country, it's all bound to this man. And even if you have a job in your own right, it would literally say housewife above and beyond anything before that, because you're just an extension of whatever job or whatever reason that man is in the country for. You're not an individual in your own right.
Yeah. No, that's very true. That's very true. And I know that oftentimes people who hear us speak on these things, and on on the problematic application of these particular practices, there's always a defense that there's a reason why all of these things exist, that there's a reason why the religion, or the application of the religion, or the interpretation of the religion, there's a reason why all of this is in place. It's to protect the woman. It's to all of those great things that people bring up. And I say, great, fine, fantastic. It still ought to be a choice. It still ought to be in the hands of a woman to decide, do I want to be 100% cared for by a man? Which I would confidently say the majority of women would probably not subscribe to that if they had free will to make that decision. Again, I know this opinion will be criticized, but for the most part, if we are truly created equal, and we have agency, these methodologies and interpretations do not make sense. Absolutely don't. And especially in today's time. And I understand that there's a lot of concern with usually the concern is around the fact that Islam was brought to the people as it is, perfect and intact, and it is not to be changed. It is not to be adjusted or upgraded, or whatever the language can be, because it is perfect as it is. I have problems with that, because but I mean, I have opinions that stem even farther than that. But let's take this into consideration. It is impossible to apply, laws and rules and recommendations that were in place over 1,400 years ago, in a time and age where so much has happened and so much has changed. So, and I'm referring specifically to when they say, well, the reason why a man can marry 4 women is because if she's a widow, she needs someone to take care of her. All these men were dying in battle and in war. And okay, well, I don't see that happening now. I don't see a lot of widows that are waiting desperately for a man to save them. I see a lot of men that marry multiple women because it is an ego trip, because it is a pleasure choice. It is, it's a power thing. And again, I'm not speaking on behalf of everybody. I'm literally only addressing the circumstances in which it's commonly now seen, and that I witnessed myself. So I don't know that any true devout Muslim that really believes that a woman is to be protected and safe would be okay with the fact that a man would marry multiple women for his own pleasure exclusively. That doesn't sound very Islamic to me.
Yeah, and like you said, Jasmine, the issue that we have is well, I'm sorry if I'm speaking on your behalf as well, but the issue
No,
that
no,
I
that
definitely have is the fact that, like you said, there is absolutely no scope for them to even have our voice heard. So when they
right.
tell us things like this, when they feed us a narrative saying, "Oh, it just had to be that way in Islam, and Islam was actually doing all these beautiful things, like it stopped little girls being buried alive, and it was even on its way to ending slavery, like, one step at a time because Allah couldn't do it right away. And men had to marry four wives. And look, Prophet Muhammad married wives of all kind of ages and
Right.
backgrounds. So there you go. Like that's an example in itself that that was so merciful of him. So you're fed a complete narrative, and then you're also told that how dare you question it? Don't you dare question the perfect man. And this is an ideology that, as you said, Jasmine, which is the crux, it is timeless, it's immutable, it's perfect, and it is from the literal words of Allah Himself. So,
Yeah.
how does one go about, challenging that? And I mean, that again, there's plenty of things happening within a scope of reform in Islam. Like we've got things like LGBT mosques opening up in America
Correct. Yeah.
and things like that. And I'm like, okay, if some elements of Islam are open to that and these Muslims are comfortable within that bubble. But for me, coming from a perspective where I really value women's rights, children's rights, we are all getting a very, very I guess lived traumatic experience that has been repeating
Yeah.
generationally
Yeah. Yeah.
because nobody has been able to challenge it because the ostracization is just immediate and so full throttle that if you're a mother to children, you're not going to risk that. You're not going to risk losing your entire
Mhm.
community. You're not going to risk every single thing that comes with it. And again, Islam has it just it puts the power in the man's favor by saying even if you try and get away, well, custody will go to the man after
Yep.
a certain age. It's very hard for you to get a divorce. If you do want a divorce, then how about you forego all of these rights that you were rights? I say it's nothing. It's a little mediocre
And
payment you get. Yeah,
may I add, it is
sure.
true. It is very hard for a woman to get a divorce. A man just has to say you are divorced. He just has to pronounce the word. He just has to look at her and say inti talig, you are divorced. If he says it 3 times, then she's like she's fully divorced. If he says it once, then there's a period of time of reconciliation. If he says it 3 times, then according to the interpretation, that is him abusing his power if he says it 3 times. So then if he wants her back, she has to marry another man, divorce that man or get divorced from that man, and then he can remarry her just as punishment to him because he, was haste and divorced her too quickly, a triple divorce. So these are actual practices, and this is not, and maybe there are radical practices according to progressive Muslims. Fantastic. I'm happy to hear that there is a new progressive way to approach some of these laws and interpret them differently. It does not negate the fact that there are these fundamental interpretations. They have happened, they continue to happen, and they are very problematic to women. And when people look at history and they see things that have happened in the past that were very abusive to a group of people, be it slavery or other forms of abuse, genocides and things like that, you cannot recover from that without addressing it completely and fully and honestly and transparently. And this is, we as women, this is what we're saying. We want to feel like our stories and our experiences are heard and that they are addressed and that they are acknowledged. This is my mission, is to make sure that women's voices are heard, and women are entitled to make the choices that they want. I love when women come to me and they say, I've made the choice to devote myself. I love wearing the hijab. I feel protected. And my answer to her is, sister, I am happy for you. genuinely, not sarcastically, genuinely, I am happy that you feel that way. If you in your heart as a woman love women and want what's best for them, you should extend that to other women to be able to make those choices for themselves and feel that same level of dignity that you feel with your choices and your hijab, for me to feel with my freedom and my liberation from any form of oppression, especially from a man. Uh-oh, did you freeze?
Yeah, I'm back.
There you are.
Sorry.
Okay. No worries.
Am I back? Yeah. Yeah, and Jasmine, I'm glad you brought that up as well, the concept of halala. So just if I may, what was, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, were you, we can go into this as well. Did you believe in everything that you were told? Did you have like personal like faith in your heart in, the theological concept and story of Islam that we're told? Did you feel that? And if so, how did you square? Because I could tell from reading a bit of your book and hearing your story that there were very, I guess, you're a very strong young mind growing up. So when you would hear or probably see around you societally, like the halala play out maybe, or somebody having to experience that, how did you square it in your mind if you had to ever?
So yeah, that's and I will be fully honest here. I never ever felt any genuine and deep connection to the religion. And this is to any religion, really. I have never felt that, specifically, obviously, to Islam, because that's what I was surrounded by. My mother's side of the family was Roman Catholic. My mom converted, but my mother's family, I had three great aunts who were nuns. My grandmother, my Italian grandmother, was a devout Catholic. My aunt was a very devout Catholic. So I was exposed to both religions, and neither one spoke to me. So innately, as a child, this was not appealing to me. Uh, of course, a big part of it is because that I was exposed to a very radical application of faith, and at every turn, at every corner, all the ways in which one can be a good Muslim, to me, were expressed and modeled as full um, oppression, but also full shedding of any pleasure in life, any whatsoever. So that, especially as a child, is a little alarming when you're like, wow, I can't do anything. So I can't do anything to be a good person. Um, so because of that, of course, innately, I never felt fully engaged or connected with the religion. Now, when I was growing up, and again, I believe things have changed, but when I was growing up, a Saudi citizen was a Muslim without a choice. When you were born a Saudi citizen, you were a Muslim. There was no exception to that rule. And if you vocally said you did not align yourself to the religion, or you do not see yourself as a Muslim, there were ramifications to that. And the ramifications were very, very harsh Islamically. You cannot turn your back on this religion. And I know that people get very indignant about labels. I know that on many of the podcasts that I go on, and other places where I've been presented, I'm referred to as an ex-Muslim. I don't even use that label, because a lot of people, and first of all, you need to be an actual Muslim to be an ex-Muslim, or an actual something to be an ex something. Because I never aligned
Yeah.
myself, I don't see myself an ex anything. But I also am deeply allergic to labels in general. I find labels extremely divisive. I think they're problematic. I think they are there to cause more agitation and more divisiveness in our society and in our community and with people. And so I choose not to use labels for the most part when I can help it. Of course, I'm a woman, and that's a label I wear very proudly. But for the most part, labels that are very socially attached to religion or social norms and constructs that mankind and politics have put forward, I try not to attach myself to. So that, I think, is how I could best describe my relationship with the faith that was thrust upon me, that I was told I had to be, that I was never given a choice. So there is absolutely no agency, autonomy, or choice in the matter. And it took me a long time, even after I left and came to the West, to be able to say, you know what? No, actually, I don't practice this religion. I don't practice any religion. And it came at, and by the way, it's very scary to say that the first few times you say it, because you are raised to believe that if you were to say that, not only will you automatically go to hell, but you are also putting your life at risk in this life right here. And that, I think, is something that the world needs to pay attention to. When we are attacking people because we accuse them of being Islamophobe when they have no clue whatsoever what that means, you know, if defending um, a religion is exclusively tied to the fact that it is a religion we're defending, then everyone should be doing the same thing about every other religion. You cannot attack people who are very Christian or evangelical or whatever religion it is. Then don't attack anyone for their religion, but don't single out one religion because you think it's attached to a group and a minority. And by the way, I will also say this. I think being hyper in defense of Islam, especially in the United States, but in the West in general today, it is an extremely racist action. And I will tell you why. Because the West seems to believe that Islam is a religion only of minorities and oppressed and underserved people. And this is a way that they are finding redemption for being anti-racist and defending the religion. The religion should not have any immunity from criticism. It shouldn't. It's just
It's an
logic.
ideology, just like any other, right?
Exactly.
And ideas are always up for debate. So, yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And Jasmine, so obviously I'm mindful of time. I could talk to you forever. So I'm just
Yes.
going to split us back to your story a little bit. But what I did kind of pick up when I skimmed your book, and I just want to touch on this a bit because I'm sure this is when you were growing up. But you mentioned the Islamic prayers for rain and how after long seasons without rain, it would be a thing. So I just wanted to kind of place that with my experiences when I lived in Jeddah, every single year after the Hajj, so the annual pilgrimage to Mecca,
Mhm.
every single year after that, that it would just naturally rain, and
Mm.
it was seen as such a blessing. Like everybody who lived in Saudi just knew that the country's going to be literally washed with all the, and they would say it as like all the germs and bacteria that all these people had brought with them coming to Saudi Arabia. Now, God is cleansing the land
Oh,
himself.
wow.
Um, yeah, that's kind of what we were rolling with in Jeddah. But what was your kind of experience with this?
Yeah, that one I've never heard, so that's interesting. But again, I was in Riyadh, so I was a little removed from the Mecca region, even though I had ties to it when I was in my first marriage. But that's one particular. It's interesting though, because I wonder the time of year or the era, the span of years that you were there, if the Hajj happened to land during the season where it would rain a little more, because being on the lunar calendar, it will change every year a little bit. So I
Yeah.
wonder what would happen when that lands in the time of year when it's more of a dry spell and it doesn't happen to rain. It would be interesting to see statistically. When I did my Hajj, it did not rain after I did my Hajj, and I did my Hajj in 1996, 97, and so it did not rain. So that's an interesting fact right there.
Yeah.
um
It were probably like, yeah, because a couple of times you're right, it did not fall during that seasonal period. And again, they said we're going to spend 2 days in the mosque praying for rainfall because it should happen this way. It usually happens. God cleanses the land. So there was a bit of a meltdown.
Interesting. Yeah, that is very interesting. I wonder if that is still a belief system. I will investigate.
And how aware were you as a child of the extent of, like, I would say, hudud or Sharia Wahhabi punishments that were taking place around you in Riyadh? Or was that just kind of put to the back?
Oh, no, it was completely in the forefront. There was no put to the
Mm,
back. That was literally it guided and basically directed every decision and every choice. Absolutely. It
yeah.
was a thing. And I will say that there were a lot of people who were not just like me, that were half Western, a lot of actual, Arabs and full Saudis and locals that had concerns with the freedom that the religious police had in implementing these laws, and no one could question it, no one could go against it. So this was uh a very, very everyday impact on everyday people. And it was, like I said, the simplest thing to go to the store if you show skin, or if you're, wearing your nail polish before you pray, if you're not on your period as a woman, you're not fully cleansed. Things like, playing music, or even being out socially when the prayer is calling. There were, it's just every aspect of your life was definitely dictated by a law or a rule that was fully attached to the, and I say, and I repeat, the fundamentalist extremist application of the religion. I know there are many Muslims all over the world that have a very different application and approach to the choice of their religion. I am speaking to parts of the world where the implementation was as extremist and fundamentalist as you can imagine.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that because I just want people to get a glimpse of, this isn't just you living your life in a villa being restricted. This is like it's permeating throughout all of society, what's
Yeah.
happening, whether it's in the sermons at the mosques or what the Islamic police are ruling, or like Jasmine said, whatever sheikh is, kind of spewing his rhetoric at that time, it all affects and impacts your day-to-day life. But Jasmine, okay, we'll come to, I guess, the main crux, and I think this is yeah, this for me was the most interesting part of your story again, because I'm always, when a woman comes to this realization and you realize what's at stake, and then you have to get to, first of all, thinking the reasons why you're planning to do this, are they sufficient and big enough to warrant the sacrifices and
Mm-hmm.
danger that you're about to put yourself in? So knowing that you are about to kind of get your escape together, can you just lead us up to what led to you thinking, I need to leave this country? What was going on in your life, and how you essentially put that plan into action? And I am listening, but I'll just be back in 1 second.
Yeah, no worries. So, obviously, the details that lead up to this are in the book, and so, again, due to time, I won't go into all the details. But I was in a marriage, in Saudi Arabia, to a Saudi man, who, was not fully arranged, but it was definitely a choice marriage. Again, the details are in the book, so I won't go into it right now. Or you can look at the other podcast that I just recently did with Cults to Consciousness. But essentially, what happened is when that marriage fell apart, I recognized that I was a 25-year-old young woman that has given a fully committed try to this lifestyle to make it work. It did not work. I was becoming more and more coming into my own belief in my own self-worth. And I also knew that now, as a divorced woman, I was essentially damaged goods. I would never be given an opportunity to the life fully of my choosing. I would have to compromise whatever the options were ahead of me, whether it's, staying a divorcee, living in my parents' home for the rest of my life, finding a career and working and having at least some sense of fulfillment in a job, and friendships, again, all with women, or become a second wife to a husband that's seeking a second wife that is not his number one wife, which is usually your pure wife, your virgin wife, and or maybe a husband that needs a second, third wife because his first wife is getting older and now he needs a somewhat younger woman to have children with. Whatever the circumstances are, I've seen all the different reasons and excuses in which why that has happened. And so I realized that at this point I am in a situation where I don't have many choices. And so I realized that ultimately the best approach would be for me to give it a try and see if I can actually move forward and plan an outcome that will give me the life that I truly yearn for. And of course, knowing what all the potential risks were, I weighed them very carefully. And I realized that, living a life that at the time felt for me like an absolute, prison sentence, or risking the life that could potentially be imprisoned forever to potentially gain that freedom. And so weighing those things felt like, for me, it felt like it was worth um, plotting and planning and seeing what I can do. That's not a decision that any woman makes lightly. That is not a decision that any human being makes easily. There's a lot to weigh there. You are weighing, who will be hurt in the process, what damage you will cause, what potential ramifications, even in your intimate relationships with all the people you've known your whole life, be it social friends or your family. You are essentially saying, I am basically rebirthing myself in a different way, hoping to be able to start something completely new and fresh that will be hopefully better than what I've had until now. And so that to me was what led me to make that decision, and ultimately plan that. And Nuriyah, I don't know if you are still listening and if you're back. I'll pause here
Yes,
for you.
I'm
Yeah,
back. No, thank you.
of course. I think you may have frozen. I don't know. To me, you have, and I don't know if you can hear me.
Sorry. Back?
Yes, there you are.
Yeah, sorry, I was gonna say it's no easy feat, and I remember in the build up to my escape from, again, very similar story, like a marriage that fell apart, realizing the intricacies of what was happening to myself, my own sense of self-worth, all of that, and then being like in this hyper kind of, I guess, hyper aware and kind of all your cortisol at like, just alarming rates, kind of being hyper
Yeah,
vigilant about every move you make, your actions leading up to that, who you share the details with, who you don't, how you let on about what's happening. It's we kind of just, I guess, gloss over it now because it's in our past and we've moved on.
right.
But in that moment, it is fight or flight kicks in
Mhm.
the strongest way. And
Yeah.
I myself had EMDR when I got back to the United Kingdom,
Mhm.
and I just kind of let everything marinate and process.
Yeah, same.
Is Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
wow. So yeah, how was it for you?
Yeah, it was great. So EMDR really does work very well. And I've said this before, EMDR and therapy and all those things, they are essential. I receive so many messages from women who are in similar situations, who have either recently, escaped a very, very traumatic situation, or maybe not so recent, but they still are having a hard time, and they are very frustrated with people telling them, just move on, look at everything you've got. And it's easier for some and not for others. For me, it was somewhat easy to say, wow, I'm so grateful for what I have. I'm so blessed. Uh, and outwardly really live a very, very grateful and a gratitude filled life. Internally, though, it's a whole other story. And I don't think, and I don't know about you, Nuriyah, but I don't think you shed that ever completely 100%, no matter how much. It's the reason why we're still talking about it and doing this work and extending ourselves beyond, our own better judgment, maybe at times, to be able to say this has to be addressed. So I don't know that it fully 100% leaves your body and your psyche, but there's definitely things you can do. And EMDR is fantastic for undoing trauma.
Yeah, I just want to second what Jasmine said there as well. Like I waited about 6 months for it, and to be honest, when they kind of diagnosed that I had PTSD, and they said we can give you regular talking therapies, or there's a new therapy out. So EMDR, yeah, Levantics, as you mentioned rightly, it is with the eyes. It stands for eye movement reprocessing and desensitization. And yeah, you kind of just follow. They take you back to the traumatic memory, and then you follow this laser, and it kind of rewires your brain in a sense that I'm with you, Jasmine. I don't think it truly ever leaves you in that sense. This has definitely kind of left its mark on you in a very, very, strong way. And I think that kind of also propels us to do what we're doing now,
Yeah.
and speak out about it and kind of raise awareness, because I really think that there was a time where I couldn't retell this story and sit here and have a pleasant chat with Jasmine about these difficult issues without just like tears streaming down my
Yeah.
face. And it was actually after EMDR where I could see, after like one or two sessions. I mean, Jasmine, when I got back to the UK, I was so traumatized by like the Middle East in general, and even men with beards and like sheikhs and these kind of things would scare me. And in
Yeah.
general, men at large, I wouldn't really leave my house. And then I remember after a couple of sessions of EMDR, this one guy catcalled me right outside the entrance to where I was going to get therapy. And I remember standing up to him immediately. My gut reaction was just to, call him out. And that wasn't me a couple of months ago at all.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
and then after that, I just, I mean, I am definitely I would say, if you have gone through anything to the extent of this level of trauma and you were diagnosed with PTSD, again, this is just my own personal opinion, is I highly do recommend EMDR for that. It worked, in my experience, very, very well for me. And as
Yeah.
you could tell, it worked pretty well for Jasmine as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, no, I
so
validate.
yeah, it's brilliant. So Jasmine, I also wanted to just touch on, you know, kind of what you said in your book about as young Arab, because again, these are like so formative years where, you know,
Mhm.
you should be exposed to different ideas, you should be exposed to different genres of music. You're just kind of figuring out your taste in art and movies and music and pop culture, who you are. And in Saudi Arabia, I mean, this was the case when I was there, so I'm 100% sure it was worse again for you. But we had no access to cinemas, movies, American pop culture bits would kind of simmer down. And, you know, in my time at least, we could get like the kind of, obviously it was very illegal, but like, you know, copied
The
DVDs
satellites.
of
Oh,
like,
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody would come to our compound and sell like illegal burnt copies of all the kind of movies that were now well past their cinema date.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was it for us. But in your book, you kind of mentioned that you had to put your creativity to work, and you brought to life a world full of kings and queens and witches and wizards, best friends who were boys, not just girls, and
Yeah.
fantasy creatures that would put shame to today's Hollywood CGI.
Yeah.
So yeah, can you just give us some insight into how you coped? Was that a coping mechanism that, you know?
Absolutely. So every child has a wild imagination, period. But put a child that has a natural, innate, instinctual imagination, and then nothing really for them to draw from to create on that imagination. That's what that felt like. And so it really became this survival thing to create this entire world. And so with my sister and with, you know, our best friends growing up, we literally created, you know, worlds for ourselves. We had a secret language that we could speak. And so I guess I shouldn't say I'm fluent in 3 languages. I should say I'm fluent in 4, because we created and invented our own language. And we, you know, we basically uh, lived a life that in our minds was what we would probably see in movies or read in books on occasion. What that was like to live this, just again, very normal, benign life. There's nothing to it other than you just have friends who happen to be boys, and you go to school that there's girls and boys, and you go to the park and you walk your dog to the park, and you see these beautiful trees, you go on a hike, you go camping, all these things that were absolutely not part of my world at all. So I had to create that in a very invisible form. We didn't even, I don't think we even had props. It was all literally our imagination. It's almost like you were wearing these, like, you know, goggles that would reflect, like, what is it, the modern day glasses that you can wear that give you the
The
simulation.
VR.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
VR we had our own VR. Everything, nothing was in front of us. We just created it, and we somehow all aligned our visions together. So that was one of the ways. The other ways is I would literally close myself in my room and just play music and dance. And um you know, I also played music, you know, piano and keyboard and a little bit of guitar and things like that. So I was putting those creative juices in areas that I felt like I could somewhat express myself. But again, it was just me. My audience was invisible. I did not have an audience. I did not have an outlet to be able to express that and share it with other people. And at the time, Michael Jackson was the biggest star in the world. This is the 1980s, and I was obsessed with Michael Jackson. I still love Michael Jackson. And yes, criticize me about, you know, all your opinions about who he was, whatever. I'm focused on the artist that really, for me at the time, was the only thing that gave me a level of excitement and a level of aspiration and inspiration. And I loved his dancing. I loved his creativity through the stories, his outfits, and all of that. And so again, that was my secret world. And in the 80s, when Michael Jackson became so popular, the Mutawa decided to ban him fully and exclusively and 100%. And you could not find anything that was Michael Jackson in Riyadh and in all of Saudi Arabia, probably. And so that also became something that I banned. And so when I'd go to Italy every summer and buy my posters or my records or whatever, we had to get very creative in how to smuggle them back into the country, because that moment at the airport caused a lot of trauma for me growing up, but especially coming back from Italy with all of my goodies. And I'm talking about, like, I don't know, like, you know, a backpack with Duran Duran's picture on it, or, you know, a pencil case with Michael Jackson, all of those things that are just like things that gave me joy as a 13, 14-year-old girl. We had to find very creative ways to smuggle them. And I do talk about it in the book, but these were the kinds of things that I had to um, trust myself to keep me sane, is just follow your creative madness, follow your joy, you know, immerse yourself in Disney movies. And these are things that here now today at my age, and some of my friends who grew up here that are very non-mainstream, that have a problem with a lot of, these typical mainstream things, they're shocked that I have such reverence for them. But that was literally what saved my life. Is I absolutely loved everything that gave me an outlet to escape the reality I was living in.
Yeah, and I'm glad, I mean, that you had, even if it was, in your own, let's say, room, just in your own world, in your own bubble, but I'm glad you had that escapism to lean onto, because in a society like that, I mean, if you didn't have that, you'd probably go absolutely mad. So
Mhm.
I'm glad you were able to carve out that kind of little, bit of sanctuary for yourself
Yeah.
amongst all of that. And you're right, like the airport was hella traumatic as well for me going back. I mean, little basic things, like we were young children, so we'd bring teddy bears back. And I'm talking about a teddy bear in the most literal sense, a bear. And the staff at Jeddah airport would literally see it come through the baggage scan, take it out, make a huge hullabaloo about it, say haram, 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 call it a pig. And I'm like, can you not differentiate between a pig and a
Wow.
bear? And just confiscate it. And when I say that, I mean, like, even for my siblings, this could have been their favorite cuddly toy at the
Yeah.
time. And to just yank that out of a child's, arms and scream haram, haram, and take it and throw it in a bin right in front of them. These things are just commonplace.
Yeah.
And it does affect a child's psyche to some
Yeah.
degree massively.
And the pig thing has always been problematic for me, because my question always was, well, if God created the pig, I mean, don't eat it, but we also don't eat cats. We don't eat a lot of other animals that do exist there and are not considered haram. Just because you can't eat the pig doesn't mean that the pig itself. And like you said, we're not talking about the actual pig being in the country. We are talking about teddy bears that may resemble a pig. We're talking about pictures of pigs in
Yeah.
books. The existence of the pig as an animal was completely forbidden, which seems to contradict this belief system that God created everything in his perfect image.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, even as a child, you can't really compute that. Like, there's this ample hatred and vitriol towards this one creature, and the kind of reasons that you're told for it are just so benign. And you're like, well, lots of other animals are guilty of the same thing, but you have this, and then also to project that onto anything else that's supposedly enjoyable or bringing a child a bit of joy or
Yeah.
pleasure or comfort or something,
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, that's when it seems like a very anti-humanistic ideology and philosophy to me in general. It's
Yeah.
extremely totalitarian in nature. Thanks, Levantix. Teddy bears are completely halal in my opinion as well.
Oh, I love that.
If only we called the shots, huh?
Yeah.
Um, and so I mean, I could bring this up as part of a question. Jasmine, are you okay to go on for about 20 more minutes?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So the other thing I was going to ask you is that I'm sure you're aware as well, like Saudi royalty and the top echelon of society. Like you mentioned in your book, it's not very much a general let's own pets that we kind of in the Western sense of owning pets in Saudi Arabia. And again, I think a lot of that stems down to the fact that black dogs are especially forbidden, but dogs are very much looked down upon, and
Mhm.
the angels won't enter your house if you've got
Yeah.
that kind of animal. So you can only own a dog under very specific circumstances. It has to be a guard dog and things
Yeah.
like that. But then, even when I was living there in Jeddah, we'd see people driving down with like a tiger sitting in the passenger seat, let's say, or a lion
Oh my
running
gosh.
around in a villa. Yeah, and then you'd see videos going viral on YouTube and things of the same thing, right? Like people just having these exotic pet lions within the confines of their villa. And I mean, honestly, from an objective perspective, like downright animal right
Mhm.
abuses, to be
Yeah.
honest. But again, something so, I mean, you've got something so benign and good, like seemingly positive, like having a pet in your family that you treat as part of the family. But then you've got this sense of uh, who can outdo who with the most
Right.
exotic animal from the most far-flung region of the planet. So I don't know, go viral on YouTube, or that's the general pastime. Because what do you occupy your mind with? You've not got theaters, you've not got
Yeah.
soft culture like we do in the West, where pretty much anything you could think of doing is is kind of available. So yeah,
Yeah.
how did that play out at all for you in growing up? And
Yeah, that's a really interesting question and an interesting comment there because I guess I was a little more maybe during the time you were there, there was a little more of that because when I left, the internet had just arrived, and so the viral competitive, behaviors and choices I think had come a little later, and so I'm not very familiar with how people used social media to, one up each other and all that. So that I'm not very familiar with. I will say that it was very sad for me growing up not being able to have a dog, which eventually I did have a dog, and there's a whole chapter on my dog in the book, and I talk about how I was able to get this wonderful dog who was just the joy of my life. But that particular decision that you're talking about, where people are making choices based on how lavishly they can express themselves, I want to speak to that in a slightly different way, if that's okay. I want to make sure that I
absolutely.
am, yeah. So I want to make sure that I'm highlighting one thing. I made the choice to go to the West. And keep in mind, I am also half Western. So that was an automatic, also very personal choice that is attached to a part of my identity. I am in no way saying or expecting that the entire region westernizes itself. I am in no way saying that people in the in those regions need to go to the West and adopt a Western lifestyle. And I am in no way saying that everything about the region is a problem. Quite the opposite, which is why I'm speaking. Because as someone that has ties, personally with my own heritage there are wonderful, beautiful things about that culture and about the application of that culture. Their relationship with animals is something that for eons has been a very normal part of the respect between the human and the animal, the respect between the relationship, even of the animals they eat. And by the way, I'm vegetarian, but even in the choices of people who eat animals, there is a very it's very similar to the indigenous and Native American. From everything that I've researched and observed, there's a lot of parallels and similarities there between the traditional Bedouins of the region and their relationship with nature. So a lot of what has happened is this reinterpretation, this twisting of a variety of things together between religion and culture and tradition and abuse of power, and add any more of those titles you want, that has then created this extremely confused, conflicted, and bizarre approach to seeing life. So I preface all this to say that I am in no way here to tell people they need to change who they are as a peoples, or the choice. I'm a big proponent of respecting people's practices and personal traditions wherever in the world, be it in the northern African countries, the rest of the African continent, the majority of the Asian continent, which, by the way, is so diverse and so different that it can't be considered all one big continent. And same with Europe, and same with the Americas, and so on and so forth. I'm a strong believer that traditions need to be upheld and valued as long as they are not hurting society, as long as they are not violating human rights, as long as they are not making of that power abusive decisions. So all this to say, in addressing what you were referring to in this like bizarre dichotomy of behavior, that's what happens when people don't know what to do with themselves anymore, because there is this absolute conflict and confusion with just a normal sense of reality, which innately we all have, regardless of how progressive or how conservative we are. There is just this normal foundation that as human beings we lie upon, which is, just being kind to one another, being kind to animals, being kind to nature, and respecting that people have their choices.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm really glad you said that as well. And just again, a disclaimer, because this channel is about, talking about human rights violations or the lack of women's rights within specifically cultures like the one we're talking about today. But if you ask me the other side of my life in Saudi Arabia, because I've said this many times, I lived in a compound, I went to a wonderful school, I genuinely had the best time of my life. So most people are shocked when they say, how was life growing up in Saudi Arabia? For me, for the most part, it was wonderful. What my parents might have had to kind of sacrifice, or what my father was seeing, attending the mosques and stuff, is a slightly different story. But I was
Mhm.
sheltered from a lot of that. So I've got memories of some of the best food in the world. And like I said,
Hmm.
as a child growing up in a bubble, and I'm saying this is not the case for everybody, but within a compound situation like that, it feels like a kind of
Yeah.
permanent holiday camp for a child. So um, and that side of things, it's strange, but I had a great experience. That's not to say that having pondered on the rest of my life experience and then going on to have left Islam, which I'm glad to have this frank conversation with you as well, Jasmine, where we can kind of just, call a spade where we see it infringing on basic liberties, particularly women's liberties, because it does that so heavily. And it's swayed to do that while offering men kind of unilateral rights. So that's why I hone in on that. But as Jasmine was saying, like even the region that we're talking about is very diverse within itself, diverse within thought, and within terms of like how they practice Islam and what elements they adhere to and not. So it's not like a black and white dichotomy at
No.
all. I'm talking about a very specific experience that I had, and Jasmine's talking about a very specific experience we had. But you can see how the general Saudi picture is coming into play for, I guess, a woman, whether you're Saudi like Jasmine, or
Yeah.
whether you're there as an expat just growing up.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kind of a crossover. Yeah.
And I will also add our stories. You just said beautifully, Nuriyah. It's our own experience, but it's also an experience that is shared by many, many, many other women, many of whom unfortunately still feel very scared to speak and are still very silenced. Whether this is their experience in the past and they've moved on, but are still afraid to open up about it. And I'm not saying that they should. I'm not obliging anyone to open up about it, but I do think there's healing in uncovering trauma, and I think there is healing in also there's strength in numbers, and so the more that come out and say this was not okay or this is not okay, I think reform will happen in whatever. And I repeat, this is not always in a large community, whether it's a cult, a religion, a country. This is also in the homes, in the very small practices and intimate spaces. It Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's happening to one person or to 100. The fact that this is a human rights violation needs to be addressed.
Exactly, and I'm so grateful that in that sphere, like I said, I'm sorry to use this word, but well, actually I'm not at all. But this is like like as you alluded to earlier, there's voices within the Middle East, and I would go as far as to extend that to places like Afghanistan now,
Mhm.
where the women are completely silenced, and I feel like the women in Iran are trying to
Yeah,
like amplify and raise their voices as much as possible. So you have this kind of shared trauma sisterhood that's
yeah,
waiting to uncover itself. And that is from, I'm going to be very blunt here, but from, I'd say, diverse cultures that have been one after the other colonized by Islam in some way and had that culture permeate to the extent where they've lost their culture. But not only that, they've lost their rights. So, like this gender apartheid that we're seeing
mhm,
in Afghanistan. In terms of education and just who's got access to society and basic civic life is what Jasmine and I are kind of alluding to in Saudi Arabia, even though there wasn't that distinct separation in that way. As I mentioned earlier, a woman is perpetually a child because you always have to approach somebody else for permission, um, for support, for protection, to get anywhere, to do anything. Every single thing you do is at the behest of a man doing that for you. And this is, I guess, if you can kind of see the common denominator here, women are seriously impressed, and to the where Islam goes to its full extreme. And you can
yeah,
talk about Saudi being Wahhabi, but let's say even with the Taliban, who might consider themselves Deobandi or Barelvi or whatever, they
mhm,
also have taken that to the extreme, calling it Islam as they see it. And they have, I mean, women who were doing PhDs were stopped in their tracks. Okay,
mhm,
women who were in any governmental positions were pulled out. Young girls are not allowed to go to school past a certain age, which is ridiculous on any level. So Islam can manifest in different ways depending on the culture and the country that it is in, but it's always, to me, at the detriment of, I'm going to add men in this, but I would say women first,
yeah,
children, and
always.
also men.
Yeah,
Yeah. Exactly.
Very, very true. May I add one thing here? And I know what I'm going to say is very controversial, but here I go. Uh, I think you were talking about the colonization. There is a lot of auto colonization happening in that region, which is basically rewriting their own version of who they are as a peoples. And it's because it's influenced by a number of things. First, it's influenced by the competition of who can be the best and most Islamic country. And so then they are, pushing themselves to making very radical decisions on behalf of the religion or in the name of the religion. So there's that. The second is also wanting to, obviously there's always that desire for power and that desire for non-negotiation of compromising tradition when tradition morphs and changes. And by the way, no more than in that part of the world, because of the trade that has happened, the fact that it was in the middle of these continents that we're trading, so much has come through that region that it's automatic that the morphing of the tradition is inevitable. So that's another thing. The last thing I want to say to that is, and this is the part that's super controversial, the West really has to be careful, because I understand that we are here to speak on behalf of the human rights violations. And I always say, go to the source when you want to address concerns and problems. What is happening right now on social media with the young, very excited activists who are enraged and wanting to address all of these problems that are happening in Palestine, in the Middle East, trying to speak on behalf of, first of all, information that they really lack. That's number one. Number two, the more push that happens in that imposition of westernizing all ideologies in that region will only inflate those fanaticals more, because then they become more and more concerned to protect their way of life, and then it becomes more radical and extreme. And I'm speaking specifically to certain things, like, for example, wanting to push the LGBTQ, liberation there. I am all for liberating LGBTQ folks all over the world, 100%. Are there LGBT people in the Middle East? Of course there are. They are all over the world. But I think that sometimes being mindful of the delicate nature of tradition and slow change has to be taken into consideration. A fire burns very, very, very hot and fast and destroys everything, and that's activism. Advocacy work is a candle that is burning slow, that gives you light, that you're able to see, you're able to get some warmth, but ultimately you get the end result. And so I say all this to say that I am not one to want to burn down the system. I believe in advocacy when you want change. Activism is when you want to draw attention to a problem. Activism is very, very important, and drawing attention to a problem is super important. But if you truly want change, take a breath and work on the advocacy part of it, because it's the same thing we see here with white supremacy. It's anytime there's a problem in a collective of people, it only gets worse if it is met with so much forced change. And I know this is controversial, but I say this at the age that I've reached. I wouldn't have said this 25 years ago when I was younger. I am saying this now because I have really studied history, and it does take time.
Yeah, thank you, Jasmine, for saying that. And personally, I don't think that was very controversial, but that's just because a lot of what you say makes complete sense to me. And I like the distinction you've made there between activism and advocacy. I think there's a lot to think about there, especially when you're talking about short-term goals versus long-term goals. And as Jasmine mentioned, history, if you should kind of, there's a lot out there that it's long-term and it's big picture. So if you do kind of study history, you would get a lot more of a holistic, kind of idea of what's happening, and then you're able to make more informed decisions and really align with things that I think are crucial for young people to understand, because it's kind of scary the direction it's headed, to be honest. And without going into it too much, because that's a whole nother podcast I would love to
It
go
totally
into
is.
with you. Yeah, exactly. And I'm really glad you did address that point, because it needs to be said. I will make a little clip of that if that's okay.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
But yeah, just to kind of thank you. So Jasmine, just to kind of end up on, kind of conclude our conversation, and then we'll just take a couple of questions that are there,
Sure.
and then we'll conclude if that's okay. But just to kind of go from you escaping Saudi Arabia, and we did touch on your dual ethnicity earlier, and I kind of mentioned I would prod this point a little bit, that
Yeah.
I think, just again, the little that I've seen of your book so far, it keeps coming back to me that your mother and her kind of upbringing and culture and exposure to even little things like basic, like pieces of literature like Little Women or something like that, that you were kind of exposed to, that does a lot to shape a young woman's mind. At least you're putting the foundations of, let's take even Little Women. They were kind of discussing these concepts and, struggling with patriarchy and their position and societal norms in that time. So when
Mhm.
you're kind of reading or hearing that in real time as a young girl in Saudi Arabia, seeing Saudi Arabia around you, it's obviously gonna, as you said, you never even fully, truly believed in the faith, and I commend you for that, because I wholeheartedly fell for it. um, but yeah, it for me, I think a mother's, or anybody, let's say, in your life that has this kind of impact on you in your formative years, to expose you to ideas that you're not necessarily getting through the
Mhm.
standard status quo of society. For me, I'm not sure how much you lend it to how much it developed your strength of character or your resolve in you even leaving and, finding all of this. But I think you experiencing summers back in Italy, having this kind of Catholic side of the family, which, as you said, is still quite conservative in
Mhm.
that part of the world. But your mum being a Florentine, and education is still key, and she's into these kind of things, into intellectual pursuits, which maybe if you were in a very rigid, closed Saudi family, you might not have even been allowed to dabble in. So how far do you think that played a role in you and kind of building who you are as a person? And second of all, um, how do you kind of see your identity now, and how do you resonate what happened and how you are as a Saudi and Italian and American now, I guess?
Yeah. Wow. I love, love, love the direction of that question. So 100%, there is no question that the only reason I am who I am and that I was who I was even as a child was because of my Italian side. It would have been a very different experience. There were times, I will say, that I remember thinking, I wish I didn't have the Italian side, because it would be so much easier if I was like fully committed and and I had nothing to compare it to or to be confused about. Those thoughts came in really deep, desperate moments, but naturally, the actual forefront thought was, I wish I was fully Italian, because that life seemed obviously so much more appealing to me. And keeping in mind that the Italian lifestyle, especially my family, I mean, it's also a very modest life in the sense that, it wasn't, I wasn't going to Italy and going to bars and discos and all that. No, it was just spending time with the family, going to the family farm, being together in company, not being veiled as a child, as a young woman. So the Italian side had a huge influence on forming who I really felt. My identity has always felt like I was far more Italian than Arab. And this is not a judgment thing. I think we just are naturally, when people are mixed of any kind of, race, ethnicity, nationality, religion, they will naturally lean in one direction over the other. But I was always guilted over the fact that I leaned towards my Italian side far more. I was shamed for it. It was like not okay. I should have been. It's almost like, excuse me, if a person is half black and half white and they align themselves with both of their races, and they are, and society tells them, no, you are what you are visibly more, or what you are visually more. You should be more the oppressed identity as opposed to the less oppressed. That's it's so it's such a problematic approach to tell people how they should feel based on their identities. So for me, yes, I was influenced very much by the culture, the heritage of the Italian side, the literature, the history, all of that good stuff. Um, and so growing up, I definitely felt way more Italian than Arab. Now, in my life today, I can firmly say that in my heart, I am very Italian. I am very, very deeply close to my Italian heritage. It speaks to me in every drop of my blood. That being said, I am also very proud and very, invested in healing my Arab heritage. I think there are wonderful and beautiful things about the Arab as a people. Um, I don't look at nationality. I don't align myself with a specific geography. I look at the people, the culture, the tradition, what they stand for, what they've done in history, what they've offered, and who they are today. And excuse me. So I try to really focus on the beautiful things that both of my cultures have offered me in blending all that as an American now, and kind of creating this identity for myself that is not the norm. So I said before, I'm allergic to labels. And so I try not to label myself. I try to use my different identities in the ways that they can serve society, that they can serve people, and that they can ultimately push me to do the best work I can do for my own personal purpose. So a chameleon, I guess, is what I can say. People like us, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, unfortunately, we've lived our whole life code switching. And if you don't know what code switching is, please look it up. We have code switched our entire lives before we even know it was a thing, before it was even given a term. And today I still live my life code switching in all the ways that are necessary to survive, but also to serve.
Wow, that was such a beautiful and comprehensive answer. Honestly, thank you. And I resonate with so much of what you're saying coming from, it's not exactly the same because, I come from Pakistani ethnicity, but the imported experience of being in the UK and trying to be British while kind of holding on to that. And then obviously Islam, and, being Pakistani and being Muslim go hand in hand. So you have a crisis after that. Am I even Pakistani because I'm not Muslim? But no, there's other and again, it's a very, very, very confused identity to try and make sense of. And then you throw in living in Saudi Arabia, living in the UAE, living in Malaysia, and it's just like, it's an absolute nightmare. But I think you summed it up beautifully. And there's parts of every culture and every experience and, kind of everything that we can, I guess it's a perfect opportunity for me, when I left Islam, especially, it was like shedding so much of what was enforced on me. And I guess with the same thing, once you're done with that, you can kind of it's up to you to pick and mix from all your cultures and all your experiences and take what resonates with you and take the values that you adhere to or resonate with you more and kind of carve out your own version of what it means to be Italian and Saudi and American, or or in my case, whatever. So yeah, I think it's beautiful that you can do that, and I don't think it's wrong to do that. I'm happy to call out very, terrible misdemeanors that take place in Pakistani society. Does that mean I'm calling out the entire nation of people? No, absolutely not. I love some elements of their culture, the fashion, the food. I would not be the person I am today. Exactly, I would not be the person I am, and I wouldn't have the personality that I have. So we have to be careful, and obviously, like, there's things to love across the board, but again, it's so crucial when we say, and I think Jasmin put it up perfectly earlier, where it's actually racist to think it's racist to criticize Islam. And I think that's kind of what I wanted to come back on and end on fundamentally. I didn't want Jasmin to kind of give too much away about exactly what happened in terms of step by step in her story, what was going on in her relationships and things like that. If you want that information, obviously you're going to have to get the book, which I think is a fascinating read anyway from what I've read so far. So and we wanted to focus more on the cultural aspects of Saudi Arabia. So with that in mind, I've just started a couple of questions that kind of relate to what we were talking about, and then I will definitely let Jasmin go because we're so thankful for her time. So yeah, I'll start with the super chats and the questions. Bender, thank you so much for your super sticker. Sorry I can't see what it was, but I'm sure it was super cute. Thank you so much for your support though. Jasmin, I'd like, if you're comfortable, to answer this question. Human rights supporter is saying, hello, what advice would you give to a Muslim youth living at home with strict parents but considering leaving Islam? I'm 17 and will get a part-time job soon and go to university next year. So any advice, please?
Wow, that's probably one of the hardest questions, and I get messages like this very, very often. And I will tell you this: believe in yourself, trust yourself. Your instinct will tell you when it's time to do whatever you need to do to be whoever you really, truly, fully, openly want to be. I always say, be mindful of the decisions that you make because time is critical. And so the urgency of, like I said earlier, that a fire can burn everything, but then it burns everything in sight. It's very good for pruning nature, because then whatever comes after the fire is beautiful. But in that moment, you need to weigh what you're doing. And so you are 17, you're still very young. And I would say the more time you spend knowing yourself, understanding who you are, your values, what you truly want for yourself, and taking every opportunity that comes your way to move closer to what that is, I think you just need to give yourself time, give yourself patience and grace, and definitely don't give up on whatever it is that you want to do, wherever it is, whether it's in that area, you want to make change right then and there, you want to be part of a movement, you want to amplify, the experience, more broadly, you want to, do that by, if in the future, if in your future you have children, you want to raise children that can really be a reflection of who you are, or if it's like completely to leave and to uproot yourself and find a better life elsewhere. All of those things are valid, but only you know the answer to that. And I say, trust it, because it'll come to you at the right time.
Thank you so much for that, Jasmin. I hope that was some advice that you'll take on board, human rights supporter. And again, I think that this is, Jasmin alluded to this earlier, because she, lucky for her, didn't really ever believe in it per se. But Jasmin, if you wanted to comment on this, feel free. Did you still fear hell after leaving Islam?
Did I still what? I'm sorry. Did I
Fear
still
hell?
fear hell? No. And okay, so I'm going to be very facetious right now, and I'm being funny. I will, well, not really. This is true. And I say this in full transparency. Even when I was a young girl, like a very young teenager, maybe tween, I remember in school when they would tell us that if you go to hell, you go with all the sinners. And these sinners were, in my mind, the people that were having fun in this life.
Really cool, yeah.
And then you're going to go to heaven with all the mutawa. I'm sorry, in my head, I used to think I'd rather go to hell with the prostitutes and the dancers and the singers, and they were having fun. Not that I'm saying that I'm, necessarily wanting to live the life of a prostitute, but that's what they would tell me. And I would be like, well, I mean, so being facetious here, but so that's my answer.
No, I'm with you. Heaven with Mutawa sounds like hell to me. So
That's it. Yep. That was it. To spend eternity with them
yeah.
literally would have been the worst. I would have committed suicide in hell.
Agreed. Same here. That was my plan. If that's
Yeah.
what really like Islamic heaven is like. And again, that's another topic that I would love to, but maybe in part two, if we get around to it, I'd love to have you on again. But we
Yeah.
can talk about, I guess, for me anyway, just the lack of anything remotely appealing for women in Islamic heaven. So that was a huge kind of question mark for me. And the way that people try and feed you these basic things to make you think it is enticing, just it baffled me how people could, their whole lives count on just that. Anyway, I digress. But also Haram Doodles was in the chat. I'm not sure if you're still here, Haram Doodles. She was saying, thanks for this conversation, Nuriyah and Jasmin. Glad to be here among courageous women.
Oh,
thank you so much.
thank you
And
very
Haram
much.
Doodles, if you don't follow her, she has an amazing Instagram page, and she actually does doodles because pictures speak 1,000 words, right?
Yeah,
So Haram
that.
Doodles captures various experiences of really, really diverse ex-Muslim stories, and she
Wow.
makes a doodle out of them and captures them through illustration. So
I'm gonna look that
go
up for sure.
Yeah, no, please do, Jasmine. I think you'd like it, with a very feminist touch as well. So I do appreciate that. Costco Hot Dogs was saying today's session feels like a therapy. Thank you
Oh,
so much. Love you both.
mm.
Thank you. That's very, very kind of you to say. And it was cathartic for me to have this conversation as well. So I hope
That's
it was the
amazing.
same for Jasmine. Thank you. Sorry if I've said your name wrong, Sashinair, but thank you so much for your comment and for being here. Madiha Talks was in the house. Thank you, Madiha. Lots of love as always. Madiha was asking the name of your book. It is pinned in the description. It's called The Last Sandstorm, and it's a memoir of Jasmin's story. So I'm going to add the discount code as well as soon as we're off in the next 2 minutes. So do go ahead and check it out. Lock is Sanity. Thank you so much for your support. Have you heard about the Saudis converting to Arab paganism in secret?
That's a great question. I have not heard specific. If you're referring to a specific group, I have not heard of this specific group, but I can tell you that I have definitely heard of many Saudis converting secretly to all kinds of things. I do want to say one quick thing, because I think I glanced on a comment that came earlier that said, to speak, that, and I get these comments all the time. We'll talk about, the oppressed women in other religions. I'm not going to talk or speak to those experiences. Those are not my experiences. And I don't know if that was to you specifically, Nuriyah, that you should bring that content to your page. But I think we need to remember that people need to speak up on their experience in their community. And if that's the content you're looking for, I promise you it's out there. Go look for it. Go find it. I think it's really a little disrespectful to come into a space where a specific topic is being addressed that has not often been addressed and that has not been often spoken to tell us then and remind us that this is happening to all these other areas. Fantastic. Please look it up in other areas. And whether this comment is coming from a Muslim or a non-Muslim, it's irrelevant, because go to the spaces that you want to hear your story reflected, or go to spaces where you want to learn about something different. But I think we need to start allowing, with more respect and with more non-judgment, for people to speak about their experience. And if it just does not resonate, then please, by all means, don't listen and move on. So I just wanted to address that real quick.
No, touche. Thank you for saying that. It needed to be said. And again, I think it's just it's a silencing technique as well. Like, oh my gosh, the spotlight is finally being, shone on this particular ideology. And like you said, a region where voices are kind of very much marginalized and silenced in general. And also whataboutery. Sure, that happens across the board, but right now we're here to discuss a specific topic where a specific type of oppression under a specific ideology. And as you said, this is our lived experience. We speak better on this, that we're not informed enough to speak on others. But I will, if there's oppression happening in other under other ideologies, which I'm 100% sure there is, I'm willing to explore that. But as Jasmin said, we're here right now for a particular conversation, and I think we should respect that. Yeah. So thank you, Jasmin. Yeah, I haven't specifically heard about Saudis converting to Arab paganism. I did obviously hear that there's a large number who are, I mean, even though it's under wraps, like leaving Islam, and we're never going to get those real numbers ever in real time or at all. But it would not surprise me if they are turning to things like, in their opinion, of going back and closer to their roots, even pre-Islamic, which is Arab paganism, I guess. So if that's happening, kudos. But Jasmin, do you have any idea on that, or?
No, I've not heard about it, and I'm not familiar. It sounds intriguing because there's a lot of cool things about, the ancient world everywhere, and everything we've built is based on some foundational tradition. And I will say it's really interesting to see how many similarities when you go all the way back and see how the entire world shares a lot of similarities. So if we're going down to just basic human, pagan principles of being kind and connected to nature, let's go. That's fabulous.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Respect Mother Nature, yeah, I'm all for it as well. Anything that veers us away from this kind of totalitarian level of oppression would be a step up. And as Jasmin said, this is not like an overnight thing. This is a long-winded process. This requires generations of change, and change at every level, from the grassroots to the absolute top. Yeah. So there's a long road ahead of us, but I think conversations like this are pivotal. So yeah, I'm glad you're here for this today. Okay, just rushing through this very quickly. Chill Out was saying they have some real good food in Saudi Arabia, and they are very generous people. I agree with both of those things wholeheartedly.
100%. 100%. I just want to say real quick, definitely the best food ever. And I will say this about the Saudi people: not only the kindest, most generous people, but the funniest people. I mean, we have a sense of humor. Not going to lie, it's pretty, especially if you understand it. Obviously, there's a lot of cultural humor. Some of the best people in the world, without a question. And I know that people nitpick, but I have never spoken ever in any of the things that I've said to my experience as a reflection of the people and the culture and the community. That has never been part of my conversation. I am very proud of the Arab culture, the Arab heritage, the region. There's incredible things about that region. I've raised my sons to know a lot of those things and to appreciate them. And so, yes, absolutely, I second that. And thank you, Nuriyah, for also having that same experience and reflecting it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I just want to echo that the best food. I mean, I'm talking. It's been years now. It's been over like 15 years since I've left Saudi Arabia, and I
Okay, favorite
still.
Saudi dish. What's your favorite Saudi dish?
Jasmine, you're gonna kill me because it's not even like technically Saudi. It's everything that Jeddah offered was good.
Oh,
So like
and
whether
Hijazi food is really delicious in a different way because it's got all the other influence from Northern Africa as well.
yeah, exactly. Like, I'm sorry, I'm a sucker for like mandi, mansaf, all of that. But then
Yeah.
everything from like the shawarmas, the Turkish grills in
Mm.
Saudi, even like the American food chains they would have. I'm sorry, it was just Al Bake. Al Bake is like I dream about Al Bake still.
Oh, wow. I do miss a
On
really good shawarma just because I haven't had I don't eat meat anymore. I haven't eaten meat in a long time, but I would eat a chicken shawarma now if it was from Riyadh or from Jeddah. But yeah,
oh my God,
some of those
yeah.
dishes are incredible. I will say anything with bamia. I will not tell you what bamia is. I'm sure Nuriyah you do,
Oh
but
my
whoever's
God.
listening, look at a bamia. Anything with bamia, especially bamia and marag, is absolutely the best.
Oh my God, bamia is one of my weaknesses.
Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, honestly, the best food in the world, hands down. Like, I'm sorry, even Dubai, when I moved there, could not top it. So, Saudi for me is up there food wise.
Yeah.
What was I gonna? Okay, this is another topic I kind of wanted to delve into, but there's too much scope around this, I think, to get into with Jasmine now. There's a lot of like meat
Mhm.
to unpack here in terms of, again, just things we're seeing to this day, elements of racism, modern slavery, those kind of things. But I just think it's beyond the scope of this conversation. But thank you, Aries, for sharing your experience of living in a compound in Riyadh. When we go out, you can see men harassing women, especially Filipinos and Black women. Um, Again, I would absolutely say that it's not the easiest topic to touch on, but yes, there are distinct, in my lived experience, once again, in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, hierarchies at play within
Yeah.
society. And there is casual, rampant racism, and it just kind of permeates through life, whether it's white collar, blue collar, what have you. So, yeah, I'd love to kind of go into that. I've made some videos on modern slavery in the UAE
Mhm.
previously, but yeah, Jasmine, I don't know if you had any comments, but I know it's beyond the scope of this
Yeah,
conversation.
it is. It's definitely a conversation in and of itself. But I will say this because in the past, when I've made comments, when I try to distinguish between race, ethnicity, religion, culture, tradition, all of those things, people get very indignant because they think what I'm saying is that there's no racism in that part of the world. Of course, there's racism in that part of the world. What I usually say is that race is not used as an identifier. People don't talk about their race or about other people's race. The prejudice and the racism that happens there is on another level, and that is a conversation for another day. And I'm very sorry that this continues to be the experience of so many women there. It is very, very real.
Yeah, and again, I as you see my channel, continue. I will be touching on this a lot more because, yeah, and it's again across the GCC, so we have to tackle each countries. I think even Qatar had some really, really disastrous news that came out with the same issue at play, basically. So, yeah, thank you for your comments on that, Jasmine, as well, because I know this is kind of your expertise
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
differentiating.
And I
Yeah,
want to say one other thing. Women are victims of that in two ways. They're either preyed upon because of racial degradation, or they are fetishized because of racial adoration. So sit with that for a minute, because what happens is just because a woman is, you know, adored or considered the symbol of beauty because of if she's fair or whatever, that is fetishizing a woman, and it is as degrading as looking at her for the other reasons under prejudice of racism. So that needs to stop. Women need to be uh, safe from this kind of predatory behavior.
yeah, absolutely. Because either way you look at it, as you're saying, it's predatory, um, in itself, the nature of what's happening, and again, to the detriment of women completely. So the level of like sexual violations that are happening here is insane, and that's again, it's cyclical in nature and how it happens, whether it starts off with the race element or the fetishizing element. But yeah, you're
Yeah.
completely right, and it is another conversation for another day, definitely. So just quickly skimming through the rest of these. Sorry, I'm just catching up. Abdurrahman, thank you so much. Again, for some reason, I can't see these super stickers. So unfortunately, I won't be able to see exactly what you sent. But thank you so much for your support regardless. And please feel free to say something next time if the super stickers aren't working. So the same applies for you, Nicole. Thank you so much. Shah Abbas, thank you for your support in Super Chat. Shah is saying, no tolerance for an intolerant ideology.
Yep. Agreed.
Absolutely. Agreed. Yep. Thank you so much, Shah. Frankie, thank you so much for your comment. Siraj Kamal has been a member for 15 months. Hi, Siraj, and it's good to see you here after a while. Nuriyah, please invite Candid with Lubna for a chat. I'm happy to have a chat with her, and I mentioned this last time. I think I saw her on ex-Muslim Sahil's channel, and I think I followed the entire conversation, and for the last 40 minutes or so, it seemed to me that there was a lot of mental gymnastics of just not accepting what Quran 424 says about beating women and domestic violence. If that's still her point of view, then I think a conversation would be pointless, because Sahil was making all the same points that I would make. And that's the cognitive dissonance that is still at play if you're not willing to accept that. Again, all of my content is there to show, the other side of what I think that verse means, and the implications it has for women at large. So you're more than welcome to share my videos with her. But yeah, again, I prime this channel on intellectual honesty. And if it says, you may beat your women and you're making 1,000 excuses for that, then I'm sorry, I don't really have the time of day to do that. I hope that answers your question. I know a lot of people were asking for this collaboration, but yeah, that's just how it is. I'm sorry. Thunderstorm, thank you for your support. Hell or Hela or Vatica is a European goddess, not a place. Oh, that
Love it.
that doesn't surprise me at all, because the concept of hell, I mean, it goes all the way back. The Islamic one goes back to the wrong concept of a place in, like, according to Judaism, Gehenna. But that's also
Jahannam,
very good,
yep.
because anyone that kind of grapples with the fear of hell, once you start to historically place it and look at its development over time, it gets so unscary the more you unravel the context, and whether it's a goddess or an actual pit where rubbish and dead bodies were thrown into. Either way, it's all a figment of our imagination, as opposed to this real place that Jasmin said would actually be cooler anyway. Thanks again, Siraj. I think that answered your question about Candid with Lubna. And yeah, feel free to pass on my message. The last thing I'd like to end on, Ethel saying, great conversation. Jasmin, please stop apologizing for speaking the truth. You went through that, and that's it. If some people can't handle the truth, that's not your problem.
Oh,
Amen to that.
Yeah, that's a very, very thoughtful and very, very kind comment. Thank you so much. Thank you. I will say thank you. I think more than apologizing, I am trying to really let people let their guard down, because people come armed and ready to attack before they even listen, and before they see a title that is very controversial or inflammatory, or just simple stating a fact in a caption, and they come very, very armed and ready. And so my need to let people let down their guard is more so for the people who are feeling triggered and upset by the things I'm saying, in hopes that they can, again, out of sheer respect. Some people you can't reason with, and to them I don't apologize or seek a conversation. So
no, thanks, Jasmin. And just to kind of wrap up, how can people find you? Where can they follow your work? I believe you also host a podcast yourself. If you could just tell us a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, so I host a podcast that is not at all related to much of what we talked about today, exclusively. It does come into play. It's called I Want You to Meet. It has been on hiatus for a little while because I'm very busy doing this other work that I'm doing right now, a lot of speaking gigs and just my full-time job. But basically, it's interviews very similar to this with folks that I have met over time that have done different things in their fields. They're either activists or advocates or just strong public servants that have done wonderful things. And so it is on all streaming platforms, and on my website you can get it as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And everything that Jasmin talked about is linked in the description below. So her website, the link to the book,